My name is Viraj Patni, and I am a senior intelligence analyst here at Intelligence Fusion. And today I'll be talking about the expansion of the jihadist threat in West Africa. So concern around the jihadist expansion in West Africa and the Sahel more broadly has really persisted since 2012, when the Malian crisis began. So we've seen jihadist attacks spread from Mali into Niger in 2015. Then we also saw attacks occur in Burkina Faso in 2016. But it's only in recent years that it's captured more attention, particularly since 2019, with the number of displaced people in Burkina Faso increasing. And of course, more recently this year, with the high number of attacks that have been carried out in northern Togo and northern Benin. So there are about 6 militant groups that operate in the region, in the Sahel and West Africa. So the key one really is JNIM, which is a coalition of Al-Qaeda aligned groups that was formed in Mali in 2017. And they primarily operate in Mali, in Burkina Faso, but they've also claimed attacks in Niger and more recently in Togo and in Benin as well. So ISIS is another group that operates in the region. They were previously, ISIS operating in the Sahel region was previously part of ISIS in West Africa. But this year it was declared its own province by ISIS Central, which probably tells you a lot about ISIS's ambitions on the continent. And they really formed, I think it was in 2015 that they formed. And this was when a group of Al-Qaeda aligned fighters defected and pledged allegiance to ISIS. And they have mainly operated in Niger's Tillabéri region, but also in the Gao region of Mali. They also operate in the Sahel region of Burkina Faso. Another group that operates in the region is Islamic State in West Africa, and they operate in many of the same regions as Boko Haram. So this is northeastern Nigeria, but also Niger's Difa region, Cameroon's far north region, and just generally in the Lake Chad area, including in Chad. And fighting between ISIS and Boko Haram does still take place here and there, but I'd say ISIS is right now at least the stronger group in Nigeria and that region just generally. So another group that operates in Nigeria, in northwestern Nigeria, in Kaduna State, in Birnin Gwari local government area of Kaduna State, is Ansaru. And they have pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda. The fighters were previously part of Boko Haram until they defected years ago and moved their operations to central Nigeria. So another group that operates in the region is Ansarul Islam. This is a Burkinabe Islamist group, and they carried out their first attack in 2016. Although it's not really known how strong the group is, because there were reports, I think in 2019, a few years ago, indicating that a lot of the group's fighters had defected to either JNIM or Katiba Masina, which is a group part of the JNIM coalition, or ISIS. But they do remain active in Burkina Faso, particularly in the border regions along the border with Mali. So there have been a few key developments in 2022. So in Burkina Faso, the situation has been particularly alarming in recent years. The number of IDPs has increased exponentially. So we've seen the number of IDPs increase from, I think it was around 85,000 in January 2019 to 1.9 million in 2022 of May, I think, this year. So Burkina Faso is in many ways, one of the key epicenters, maybe along with Mali now. And we've seen militant groups sort of control key routes especially around towns in border areas of Burkina Faso. They also control large areas of the eastern region or the Est region of Burkina Faso, which borders Niger, Togo, and Benin. And we've seen how these groups have imposed blockades on some of these regional capitals And just generally speaking, we've seen attacks occur closer to the capital, Ouagadougou. So in Mali, we've seen many similar developments. So we've seen attacks carried out closer to the capital, Bamako. Only recently, we saw a suicide vehicle-borne IED attack targeting a military base in Kati, which is north of Bamako. And that isn't the only attack that has occurred close to Bamako this year. We've also seen Katiba Masina impose a blockade in a town in central Mali called Boni, and because of this blockade, we've seen sort of supplies to Gao, which is a regional capital in the area, really sort of decreased by road. So in the Gao region of Mali, we've seen ISIS increasingly active. This is the region of Mali where close to the border with Burkina Faso and Niger, and we've seen ISIS carry out attacks or fight with signatory armed groups in the area. We've also seen a number of massacres targeting civilians, and many of these attacks are now edging closer towards Manaka, which is a town in the region. So according to the UN, militant groups, they control about 75% of territory in the Gao region. So the situation, I'd say, in that region of Mali is particularly concerning at the moment as well. In Togo and Benin, we've seen a number of attacks being carried out too, especially this year, I'd say. I think there have been around 20 attacks that have been carried out this year alone. In Togo, a state of emergency has been declared in the north, the Savannahs region, and in northern Benin, we've also seen, I'd say we've seen more attacks carried out in northern Benin this year. We've seen these attacks have been complex in nature. There've been ambushes, complex attacks, also ID attacks. Although some of these attacks targeting the military haven't been as successful as Burkina Faso and Mali, I think this is something to watch out for. And these militant groups aren't carrying out these attacks from these countries. They're operating out of Burkina Faso, which is something that we saw in Ivory Coast last year too. And I think there are concerns now because in Benin especially, there have been recent reports that these groups are trying to recruit locally. And just generally speaking, in areas of northern Ivory Coast, northern Ghana, Togo, Benin, these are neglected areas of these countries, poorly developed, and there are populations in these areas hold grievances against the government. And this is something that jihadist groups will look to exploit, as they have done in Burkina Faso and Mali. So in Nigeria this year, we've seen ISIS conduct attacks outside the usual area of operation in the northeast. They are reported to have established cells in northern areas of and northwestern areas of Nigeria too. So, for example, we've seen them carry out attacks in and around Abuja, including most recently a complex attack which targeted a prison on the southern outskirts of Abuja. And Ansaru have been particularly active as well this year, particularly with their social media sort of claims and things like that. We've seen, so this year the group reaffirmed their allegiance to Al-Qaeda, and there are also reports that they have established their own governance structures in Birnin Gwari, local government area where they operate. So Ansaru have also carried out a number of incursions in some of these communities where they have asked inhabitants to reject the central government and formal education. And in some cases, they've also pledged to protect these communities from bandit groups that also operate in the area or in the northwest more broadly. Bandit groups will be a challenge for Ansaru, but I think there's also a risk that these groups can be co-opted potentially by Al-Qaeda to really increase their presence in that part of West Africa and northwestern Nigeria. Elsewhere in West Africa, this year we've also seen a report in Guinea-Bissau where unidentified individuals vandalized a Catholic church. This was a first attack of its kind in the country, but there have been concerns around radicalization, and Islamic and Christian leaders have called on the government to act on this threat because they see it as a growing threat in the country. And in Guinea, we've seen a report this year where a former prefect of Labe, which is a city in central Guinea, and he mentioned that emissaries of Boko Haram visited the city. He may have meant ISIS as well, so it's unclear. So in recent years, we've also seen coups in Mali and Burkina Faso. So in Mali, where the French forces have played a central role really in the region, in if not eliminating the threat, but they've certainly contained it in Mali, especially that tri-border area. But since the coup in 2020, relations between Mali, the transitional authorities or the military, and France have really deteriorated. And since then, we've seen a drawdown in operations from France in the country. And this is partly why we've seen a number of ISIS attacks, for example, as I mentioned, in the Gao region and the tri-border area more generally. And French forces withdrew from Mali this month in August 2022. We've also seen tensions between France and more broadly the EU countries and Mali surrounding Mali's cooperation and with the Wagner mercenaries from Russia, who have had limited success in the country. There have also been multiple reports of civilian casualties in Mali with Wagner mercenaries and the Malian army being accused of, in one report at least, killing about 200 civilians in central Mali. So they have really, so the jihadist sort of expansion in Mali has, this is partly why we've seen an increase in their expansion and the activities in Mali. In Mali, we've also seen the peacekeeping mission come under pressure from the transitional authorities, and protests have been scheduled to take place to demand the withdrawal of the peacekeeping mission from the country. Mali also announced their withdrawal from the G5 Sahel regional force, which has played a role in countering the extremist threat in the region. And in neighboring Burkina Faso, we've also seen similar developments in that there's been increased pressure, I'd say particularly in the last 2 months, with transitional authorities now being questioned by many Burkinabes because of the increased number of attacks being carried out in the country, and anti-France protests have also taken place in Burkina Faso, with protesters demanding that the authorities choose to partner with Russian forces instead to assist with the jihadist threat. And in Niger, we've also seen the government come under pressure. This is also related to the cost of living, which is broadly a theme affecting the region as a whole. So the questions around governance and corruption that the government in Niger has faced. Protesters are also, I think protests have been planned again to demand the departure of French forces from the country. And I think more broadly in the region, this is something that other West African countries will have to contend with the cost of living rising and concerns around the jihadist threat. Governments will be facing increased pressure from their citizens to demand more effective action. Thank you for watching this episode of The Insight. We release a monthly report on the West African region. Click the link in the description to subscribe to the mailing list.